name is Dr. Sean Lordan. I am the host of the Hooked on Health podcast. Welcome today. And we've got special guest, Allan Belden of Belden Golf. He's a PGA professional and the former head pro at Worcester Country Club for 25 years, 26 years, Allan? What is it?
I was, yes. So 25 seasons. I was 21 seasons as the head pro. Started there as an assistant back in 1996.
Yeah. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Allan, and your credentials, and talk to us. Maybe start a little bit about the difference between a PGA professional and a PGA Tour and pro, and the details and instruction and all that good stuff.
Yeah. So I think as a head golf pro, which I think is what probably most of people joining us today are the ones that are interacting with your local club. So the PGA professionals are the ones that are administering golf at the local facilities. We're responsible for running tournaments, teaching, growing the game, et cetera. And I think one of the biggest things that is confusing to people is when you introduce yourself to people as a PGA professional, they're like, "Oh, have I seen you on TV?" And that's the PGA Tour. So that's one of the things that's misunderstood. So there's the PGA touring professionals. The PGA Tour is a separate entity from the PGA of America. PGA of America has 27,000 members, of which I am a member, and those are the people all across the country that are administering golf every single day in your backyard.
Excellent. So that's great. So talk to us about and obviously today's call we're going to talk about injuries. We're going to talk about everything from skill to injury prevention. So and one of the things that I talk to my patients about is, I can give you the foundation as a physical therapist to move well, but I can't teach the skill. So that's where, I want to talk today a little bit about how they intertwine and how you see kind of our two fields interacting. But talk to me a little bit about sort of the common, let's just talk about sort of like the common body parts you encounter that you see stiffness in. Talk to me about your typical kind of golfer who comes to see you. How old are they? What sex are they? And what are their common complaints and what are their goals?
Well, obviously the reason why, people will reach out to their local professional, for help and for instruction is because they want to play better, right? So, the phone doesn't normally ring when people are playing great. But when people have an issue, is when we hear from them. To say that, one thing is common from male or female, I would say that the back, right? So, the low back is probably one of the things that we hear all the time. Oh, my back is bothering me. But from a functional standpoint, I think that probably the thoracic spine, the mid back and the low back are probably the two areas, that I see that have limitations and restrictions. And I think a lot of it is, a lot of the people that we're dealing with in the industry, a lot of them are people that spend a lot of time sitting, right? So I didn't coin this phrase. I don't even know where I heard it, but somebody had said that sitting is the new smoking, right? So and it's there's nothing worse than sitting all day. So I've said to people, you spend however many hours a week sitting at your desk, and then you're in your car sitting, and then you go home and you sit down, and you do that Monday through Friday, and you show up at the golf course on Saturday morning. Don't really warm up, go right to the first tee, and then come in after playing 18 holes, and the player will say, "Well, my back bothers me," and I would be surprised if it didn't, right? So. Low back health is probably the number one complaint. I think probably the one thing that people don't understand is thoracic and mid back, which I'm sure you can elaborate on. And that's one of the limitations that we see that affects the swing.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is, nobody really understands that your hip flexors, right? The muscles that get short when you're sitting have feet. They come off of your lumbar spine, right? So they're coming off right off the spine and coming forward. So if your hip flexors are tight, that's going to directly affect how your back feels and how it moves. So, I think the tough part is, kind of getting into the groove of, and we can talk about this and how you coach your players. We talked about it briefly, a couple of weeks ago when we were talking, but, what is, we can talk about it toward the end, but what does that, 3 to 4 exercise loop look like prior to taking, those first couple swings, right?
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of a foam roller, right? So like I try to encourage, all of my clients to invest $20 in a foam roller. That is one of the things that I think that is not, most people don't have that should have if they're playing golf. And so using a foam roller prior to playing and even leaving the house for 5 or 10 minutes in the morning to work the thoracic spine. And then there are certain stretches, for the low back that will work out the iliac psoas, which I think is what you're referring to, that goes through the hip flexor, attaches to the spine, where things like pigeon and some of the other yoga and stretches that will loosen that up. I mean, if the body's not ready to play, I mean, besides affecting performance, we're also talking about back health and the ability to play. I think one of the worst things that can happen in the early spring is that people run out to the tee without properly preparing their bodies to play. And then in April, they're injured. And so the rest of the summer is affected, right? And so you're losing a player. And that's just the worst thing that can happen for the game. So, I'm a huge fan of the foam roller. And there are several stretches that you can do to work the mid back and the thoracic spine, as well as some other things you can do to work the lower back.
If anybody has any questions or they want those stretches, I'm happy to send out, if they email either of us, I'm happy to send out just a quick foam roller routine. You're probably talking about just rolling the mid back, maybe doing a little opener. And these stretches, Allan, they take like 2 minutes. I mean, this isn't like, it's not even 5 minutes. You could hit it, even if you're right out the door, just hit the T-spine. That takes 30 seconds. Do an opener for a minute, and then maybe a pigeon pose, and you're good to go. I mean, if you do anything, I would hit those 3 if you just got a stiff back, because that gets the hip rotation. It gets your thoracic spine kind of moving a little bit. And then once you get onto the course, at least you just loosen up with a sand wedge or something, get the body grooving up, and then you should be good to go.
Yeah, I think before you even get to the range and swing a golf club, I mean, anything that you can do to get the blood flowing and get the body ready is important, right? So, and you're correct. I mean, it can be as little as 1 or 2 minutes. Or longer, but look, anything is better than nothing. And yeah, you're correct. I mean, the pigeon and some of the other things for the low back, but yeah, I mean, I love the opener, right? So it's just, you're on a foam roller, yeah, and you're hanging your head back, and that foam roller is right below your shoulder blades, and you're letting gravity do its work. And when you think of like a lot of the things that you're doing with the foam roller, it is the complete opposite of what you're doing when you're sitting. Right. It is the complete opposite, right? You're putting the spine and the body in positions that are opening them up, because when we're sitting, everything's getting short and tight and closing up.
And I think this year we'll find that with COVID and the COVID winter and the spike, weight gain and obesity and adiposity is also directly tied to low back pain and sciatica. So, I wonder, it'd be interesting to see this year, Allan, how people coming out of their COVID coma, which is what I call it, how they perform and how they're feeling, and even just that extra, little 10-pound weight gain can really affect swing speed. It can affect a lot of different things, so just hitting, getting back into a regular exercise routine, whether it's walking, whether it's just doing any, even if it's the difference between just walking instead of taking a cart, if you're healthy enough and you don't have, super arthritic joints, that would be a huge win, just to drop a little bit of weight,
Yeah, I found it interesting, right? Last spring at the beginning of COVID, when golf carts were not allowed, right? It wasn't even an option. People had to walk, right? For the first few weeks that golf was even allowed in Massachusetts, it forced people to walk, and a lot of people continued to walk throughout the summer because they enjoyed it and they felt better. And yeah, I mean, if you're walking versus riding, it's obviously way more beneficial. Interestingly enough, when you talk about that, so I wear a Whoop, which measures daily strain, and a couple weeks ago we played 4 rounds down at Pinehurst, and 2 we rode, 2 we walked. The activity strain was 40% higher on the days that we walked. So there's definitely a lot of benefits to walking. And I think COVID, to me, what I've seen with individuals and players is like there's not a lot of middle ground. It was like COVID was either a reason for people to get in really good shape because they had the time and they did it, or they went the complete opposite other way, right? So that's been my experience. Like people either use the time to really get into good shape, or not. I didn't see a lot of middle ground during COVID.
Yeah, I would agree there. And I think I think there's a ton of benefit to walking. And I think the one key thing with walking, and the one sort of caveat is, if you're walking 18 holes, toward the end, you may get a little fatigued if your body's not used to it. So, that could potentially affect your golf swing. But I think the overall benefits of walking are going to be better than, over the long term. Your body will adapt and get stronger. It's going to be better than, better than riding. And again, in riding, you're sitting, you're still sitting, right? So if you're older, you're 50 plus, you're stiff, you're prone to arthritis, you're getting out of that, you're coming from a flexion position, you're sitting and you're going up and you want to go hit the ball. No wonder you can't hit that 250-yard approach shot on, on 3 or whatever it is, on 4.
Right.
So to the green. So, I think that, preparation, but the first couple months of the season, if you can get out and walk, that's probably, one of the better ways to get in shape after the winter, I think. So what do you do specifically? Let's just talk about maybe like a tournament day, right? So I know one of the things that people are interested in, Allan, is what you do specifically to prep your body, maybe before like a tournament, or, like Pinehurst. What'd you do for that?
So the mornings of an event, I just had one on Monday. So I like to do some sort of cardio early on the day of an event to get the blood flowing. So to warm up, I like to spin. So I spend a lot of time on the cycle. So, I will do that for, 30 or 40 minutes, and then go into a stretching routine with the foam roller that takes, about 10 minutes, 12 minutes, but, working from head to toe, and shoulders, mid back, neck, the hip flexors, all the way down through the calves. And so, and then doing some foam rolling at the end to try to, do some release, and keep everything, keep the blood flowing, keep everything moving. So, that's what I like to do on the mornings of, and then when I get to the golf course, then we'll go through a much shorter, stretching routine, but also things to warm up the shoulders, the wrists, and the low back as well, before I actually swing a golf club. So, and I think the other thing too that I think that people overlook is that, the days leading up to an event, especially the day before and the morning of, is hydration is usually important. So I think most people do not drink enough water. So as you and I sit here, pounding the water. So that would be, the day of, because I just think it's, you talk about the fatigue factor, especially if you are walking, if you're not hydrated, you are going to lose energy. And I think that the other thing is that, that is misunderstood is that, dehydration also has a huge impact on mental focus, right? So the ability to stay in it for 18 holes, and 4+ hours to be able to concentrate and focus, hydration has a direct correlation to that as well.
Yeah, what's interesting too, and just to that point on hydration, is that the older you get, Allan, and people don't realize this, there's less like hormonal signaling, like leptin and ghrelin, which are two main hormones in your body. Your body isn't telling you thirst or hunger as much as it did when you were 25 or 30. So when you're out in the sun and it's really draining your energy, you need to stay ahead of it, especially when you're 60s, 70s, and 80s, because your body isn't keeping up with that response. So what I tell people is carry one of these things around on the golf course, fill it up with ice at the beginning of the day, especially if it's a hot day, and just sip it over the course of the day. And, I know most courses have the water jug things, just fill it up. If you could do 2 of these when you're on the course, I think, your brain, your body's 64% water, so between 60 and 65% water. So it's vital to be able to perform optimally. And it's one of those things you can easily monitor, or easily change, beyond, the foam rolling, all the routines and the prep work and things like that. Let's talk about just, and I know one of the big things, and I struggle with this personally, is how much time do I spend on the range before I go out and play? So my personal routine is I have to go up and just hit some short wedges and like kind of mess around with the green area and just try to make contact. what do you recommend kind of the novice, 5 to 20 handicap player? I know it's a big range, but the weekend golfer, the once or twice a week golfer, what do you recommend they do before they go out to play?
Well, obviously, assuming that, that ideally if you've done things to warm up the body before you get to the driving range, that would be ideal. And then, on the range, I mean, depending on how much time you have, right? I mean, you're not, the idea of going to the range before you're playing is to warm up, and not to try to fix the flaws, right? I mean, what you have brought to the golf course that day, in most cases, you're not going to change it before you walk to the first tee. So the objective at that point should be to get warm, and obviously starting with shorter clubs, right? You want to build, right? And you will definitely see, when we do baselines and using launch monitors, the difference between the first swing and the 12th swing, the speeds are completely different because now the body is now starting to prepare and you're building up that baseline. So yeah, starting with a wedge, something shorter, and then going up in the bag through the mid irons, and then finishing with the driver. And then I always like to finish with a few wedges before going over to the putting green, and putting being the last thing that you're doing to get a feel for the speeds before you head to the first tee.
Now, how much time do you leave before tee time to prepare for all that, to get all that in?
You're talking about warm up, not counting the stretching? Yeah. 45 minutes to an hour, depends on the day. But usually, it's about an hour, and sometimes it can be a little bit less.
Yeah, I think that's good, just so you don't feel rushed. I think, the putting is key too, right? Just kind of getting a feel for what the greens are like that day, if you're really, competitive, right?
Yeah. And I mean, look, so golf is played at a baseline of it's very even keeled, right? So I think if you're rushing to the driving range to try to get in a few swings, and then you're rushing to the to the practice green to hit a few putts, and then you're rushing to the first tee, well, then you're going to be rushing for the first few holes. Your tempo is going to be disrupted. And so I think it's, you want to set the tone, for the day. And look, I get it. I mean, people playing recreationally, leaving work may not have that option, right? So we're talking about optimal conditions here and having the ability to get there an hour beforehand. I certainly understand that those that are playing at their local facilities, just for recreational purposes, may not have that option. And the question comes, well, if I don't have time to hit balls, or if I have to pick one between hitting balls or putting, I think putting is important as far as scoring is concerned. But I think that if you don't take any swings before you go to the first tee, you're opening yourself up for injury. So that's, I guess, a personal choice, but I guess missing a couple putts versus not hurting my lower back, I'd probably choose the warm up, right? So
yeah, I think I'd rather get through the whole season than miss a couple putts, right? Cool. So in terms of, we talked about the low back, we talked about kind of hips, maybe a little sciatica. What else do you see in terms of maybe more, different impairments?
So, then the joints, right? So we get into the joint issues, right? So, cause it's a repetitive use, impact game, right? So we'll see a lot of things with, forearms, elbows, shoulders, and that type of stuff. And a lot of it is technique based. Like, so if somebody has a poor grip, and is, impacting, the golf ball incorrectly or swinging the club incorrectly, because they're putting their joints in a position that's awkward or not natural, that can lead to injury. And so those would probably be the next most common things. Rotator cuff injuries, tendonitis in the elbows, are some of the things that we see. And I think that, one of the things that I would caution people too, a lot of times now in the beginning of the season and going out to the local facilities, the grass tees are not open, right? So you're hitting off of mats. Depending on the quality of the artificial turf that you're hitting off of, if it's hard, and you're hitting, 58 irons in a row, that is a recipe for tendonitis in the forearm. So, I just caution people on that.
Yeah, I mean, and the tendonitis, it's something we see pretty commonly, and and it's actually, the nickname is golfer's elbow, right? So any pain on the medial side of the elbow here, but I see it on both sides. So I see the lateral epicondylitis, which is on the top, and then on the bottom is technically your golfer's elbow, so tennis and golfers. it's funny because I see more tennis elbow in golfers than I see golfers elbow in golfers. But I think that if I were to give any blanket advice, is just go see a professional almost like right away when you start to get that symptomatology, because the longer that it lasts, Alan, if it's more than a week, I always say, the first week, just take some Advil, ice it up a little bit. If it feels better, you're probably fine. After that first 7 days, if it's still bothering you and the grip starts to get affected or there's numbness and tingling, I would say go see your local PT or, whoever does your body work and get some body work done, because, that's just those joints, these little, in the connections here, the common extensor tendon, once they're frayed and they're kind of in a bad place, then you're looking at PRP shots, and it's kind of it starts to get a little wishy-washy in terms of how we can actually rehab it. But, I think that's a good point. The grip, I never even thought about the grip in terms of how that can affect tendinopathy or elbow pain. Do you see that a lot when you change people's grips, their pain goes away?
Yeah, I mean, I think, a weak grip position, will change, how, we call ulnar deviation, right? And how the ulnar is going to be working, right? And so the position of the wrist is vitally important to having the club, swung on the correct path. And, when we see people who's, the left hand, for the right handers, the left hand is underneath, we would be in what we call a weaker position a little bit too much. It puts strain on the forearm at the top of the swing that would not be incurred if they were gripping the club correctly.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk about some of the problems that the recreational golfer has. So let's say, you get a 50-year-old, weekend warrior golfer who plays once or twice a week. Maybe they're a 15 handicap. They're coming to see you. They say, Alan, make me an 8 handicap, right? So you look at their swing. So you're already laughing. You're like, that's not going to happen. You can learn how to putt, right? So where do you start with that person? What are you analyzing? What goes through your brain when you're analyzing that 15 handicapper?
Well, the first things first. So, I mean, I always try to do an upfront assessment and interview where, especially, with a new student, 100%, usually a phone call in advance to try to get a feel for where they're at, what they want to do. Do they have any physical limitations, injuries? The other thing that we deal with now that we didn't deal with 15 years ago is joint replacement, right? I mean, everybody's got new hips and new knees. And so those are things that we have to take into consideration. So I want to learn before I even meet them, on the lesson tee, what limitations they may have. And then from there, discuss what they're doing about that. And then figure out, what their goals are. How, what are their time constraints? How much time are they going to be able to put into it? And then from there, after watching them develop a plan as to, where they're going to improve the quickest. So I always will, in most cases, will find one or two fundamental things that will make a huge difference in a short period of time. And those are the things that I will go after first. I call it the low hanging fruit. And in a lot of cases, it is grip and it is posture. If we can clean those things up, the way that the ball striking will improve pretty quickly and pretty dramatically. And then how much time the individual puts into it, will dictate, how fast that improvement will happen. But it's to go from a 15 to a 12, sure. 15 to an 8 in a year is hard. I mean, I've seen it happen, but the individual would have to put in a fair amount of time. And then obviously the short game, right? So that's the one thing that people disregard. Typically speaking, 2/3 for the average handicap, which in the United States is somewhere in the 15, 16 range, 60%, over 60%, close to 2/3 of your shots are going to happen from the flagstick to 30 yards out. So within 30 yards of the flagstick is where 2/3 of your shots occur. And there's very few people that I've ever encountered that spend that amount of time working on that part of their game. The ones who do are the ones who improve the fastest.
So, in the world of PT, right? So if you came in for a low back injury, I'd say, Alan, you're going to see me 3 times a week for the next month, and then twice a week after that. It's about maybe 3 hours of your time per week, to fix your back problem. Is that how are you prescribing people to fix their golf game?
So it's, yeah. So, I mean, we're not meeting 3 times a week. So I think, look, I will say this, one of the worst things that can happen is you give somebody, you spend an hour with somebody, you work on whatever changes you want to implement. And then you schedule something for, say, 10 days later or 2 weeks later, whatever, and they come back. And my question is, so have you had a chance to practice? Have you played? How's it going? I haven't touched a club since. So, well, then why are we here? Right. So if you're not going to put the time in between when you're, my whole mission in the course of an hour lesson is that when the individual leaves, they have a blueprint for what they need to do to implement changes. Right. So, if they don't take the time to practice and try to make those changes on their own, and look, I understand it's not a full-time job, but if they'll just spend, 2 or 3 hours a week, practicing, that will make a big difference. And so, I don't like to see people too close together. Like, it's not 3 times a week. I would say at the bare minimum, 7 days, but it's all related to how much are they going to practice. I mean, if somebody's practicing every day and I have somebody who is playing full time, then, it may be sooner. And then there's also things that we can do in between. I mean, now in the virtual world that we live in, there's a lot of, there could be a 15-minute conversation in between sessions where the student will send me video and I'll analyze the video, send it back to them, and then we'll schedule a call to review it together. So those are the things that you can do in between as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that's, personally where I've found the most success is to, get the lesson, stew on it, play around with it for a little bit, take it to the course, and then schedule that follow-up the next week or, 10 days or whatever. So I have some time to really think and absorb,
Yeah. And I think the thing is, when you practice and play, how you process it, right? So from my perspective, I need for you to give me feedback as to how you're processing the change, because everybody's different, right? So, and without the practice and the playing in between sessions, we don't have that. I need for the individual to tell me what they are feeling, what they are experiencing, what they're thinking when they're hitting good shots and when they're hitting poor shots, so that we can kind of figure out what's going to make sense to them, because everybody learns differently.
Yeah, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I'd love to kind of hear your approach to this as well. And what I've found as my game has improved, is that it became more mental, right? And it became more kind of learning, not getting down after a bad shot because you can recover, and it also became more about, taking the lesson maybe to the course. So off of once I have the swing down and, short game up, that's good. Taking it to the course and thinking through really every different shot, how you're going to kind of, and this is, for less than a 10 handicap, I don't know whoever's on the call, but how are you going to maybe turn a shot, or how are you going to keep it low, and just the different, talk about things that kind of go through your mind that might be different than, the average novice golfer when you're making a shot.
So depending on where you are in your level, right? So there's a time when you have to think, right? And on the driving range, and this is the thing, you hear this comment, I can't take it from the driving range to the golf course, right? So, and I think that when you are practicing and you are working on fundamentals and you're trying to impart change, there's a time when you're doing that you do have to think. There is a mental aspect to it. You have to do the repetitions enough so that it does become part of the subconscious. Most people don't put in the time to get to that point. And that's why it doesn't go to the golf course, because when you're on the golf course, you want to have a pre-shot routine that you are doing on every shot that is the same every time. So the brain and the body don't know the difference between rehearsal and reality. That's what the routine does. And so it allows you to climb into that subconscious mode that once you're ready to pull the trigger, there's not any tension. There's not this thinking. There's not the checklist, right? We've all played with the guy who's over the ball, and you can just see check, right? Grip, keep the head down, right? Yeah, and it's like 17 seconds before the trigger gets pulled. You get no chance, right? So once you get over the ball and it's time to go, you should go. It should become more reactionary and less thinking, and that's a process. It's a process to get to that point where the technique and the fundamentals are at a suitable baseline where you can transition from thinking to subconscious. And it takes time. It does take time.
So we've got a question. I know Mark had asked, so we're in the audience here. So I wonder what Allan thinks, whether Allan thinks what Bryson is doing will have a negative impact physically on the recreational golfer.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're if you're not in the in the shape of Bryson DeChambeau and you're trying to swing a driver at 130 miles an hour, then yeah, it will have a negative impact. Look, I mean, he's and I don't mean this in a bad way, but he's a bit of a freak, right? I mean, he's an outlier. So I mean, most of the guys on tour are not trying to do what Bryson is doing. Because it's extremely hard to control when any club, but the driver, especially when it's moving at that high rate of speed, it's hard to know where it's going. It's extremely difficult to play under control. And he has obviously made a point to create speed and create a different baseline. And on some weeks it works for him, other weeks it doesn't. But it isn't certainly something that most players, amateurs or professionals, are going to attempt to do. It obviously does have a strain on the body. Now he's a pretty big guy, right? So I mean, somebody like him versus a Jordan Spieth, who's a little bit more wiry, or Justin Thompson's wiry, right? He probably can do it for a longer period of time than those individuals, but not something that I would recommend.
Yeah, and then you get into the different body types. You get your mesomorphs, the muscular, the DeChambeaus, endomorphs, kind of the shorter, kind of heavier people, and the ectomorphs. But and I think that's where our fields kind of both work together in terms of providing the base level of strength that's needed, right? Because some of those taller, lankier players are going to have hypermobility issues, and
Yep.
the shorter, endomorphic, they're going to be tight, and you're going to see the shorter swing arcs. And I think what we teach kind of there is maybe just consistent ball striking capabilities, and just really trying to tighten up the swing. But yeah, Bryson, putting on 40 pounds over a winter, I mean, or over a year, that's that's a lot of muscle. And I think strength is important. You need strength to be able to hit the ball far, and to make sure that you don't get injured, right? But keeping a lot of muscle on you too is, that that can play a toll in the body, put a toll on the body as well.
Yeah, I think he's kind of peeled that back a little bit, right? I think this year he's lighter than he was at the start of last year ago, last spring. So he's kind of taken it back a little bit, but yeah, it's just, look, everybody's different, right? And there's different ways to create speed. So it's an individual approach, but yeah, I mean, I've seen his workouts and where he's trying to create speed. It is not for most people what he does. It really is not. So
let's talk about swing aids. And so I just got the speed sticks, right? And I've been doing that. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you recommend to your students?
So yeah, there's not a ton of aids on the market that I love. I think that anything that helps with mobility, that will allow you to stretch. And there are a few items that are out there that will help to, work with mobility and flexibility. I don't have any problem with people using that. The things that claim to be quick fixes, that are basically trying to do an end around on technique, may work for a short period of time. But they're not going to work long term. And usually when you're doing that, you're sacrificing, like some of the wedges, for example, that have, an awful lot of offset, to help people get their hands in the right position. When you do that, you're de-lofting the club. So will it help you with your, impact position? Sure. But if you need to hit a soft shot, it's really hard to do that with a club that's leaning that far forward. So there's pros and cons to everything. As far as the speed sticks are concerned, specifically, yeah, they do work, but you have to do it, right? So again, like anything else, it's like the treadmill that you buy that sits in the corner of the basement and doesn't get used. So you have to go through the protocols, and it's several weeks and into months where you will actually see gains. But those people that play for a living that I've encountered and spoken to, they definitely have seen a higher baseline of club head speed if they do spend the 60 or 90 days going through the protocol. So yes, it does work. But you have to do it. And the last thing I will say about that is that any aid, if you're like, so the speed sticks, for example, if you're working on club head speed, which is what that does, increasing club head speed, but you have a poor grip, well, you're just going to hit it further in the wrong direction. So it's, there has to be a balance of having good fundamentals along with using the aids. So.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think that's really important for people to know. It could be something as simple as a grip, that could help save you like 2 or 3 strokes every, even more than that potentially, right? If you can, create some consistency and posture and grip, maybe all it takes is a trip or, for a 5-pack, a 5-session thing with your local PGA pro, and you improve your game by 5 strokes,
Yeah. I mean, grip and here's the thing. I think, it's a lot of people don't know what it's supposed to feel like or look like, right? And I think to me, it's all about the feel, having the grip more in the fingers. Most people are too much in the palm, which comes from, growing up playing baseball, right? So that's where that comes from. And then the posture, a lot of it is physical, right? So if people are, short and tight in the psoas and the low back, then they tend to be back on their heels, which affects the posture. And that's the path. So grip is face. So the grip impacts the face position it impacts, and the posture affects the path. And so those two things are what going to dictate where the golf ball goes. Those are the two absolutes. Where the face is pointed to impact and the path of the club during the swing, those are the two things that are going to determine where the golf ball flies. And so what we do, with our bodies is going to obviously impact that, and how you hold the club impacts that. I think the big thing is, and myself included, I mean, I take lessons. We can't see ourselves, like the other set of eyes, putting the club face down and saying, "Oh, my club face is open." When I say to somebody, "Your club face is 2 degrees open. That's why you're pushing it to the right." They're like, "Really?" Like they're not aware of it. You need somebody else to make you aware of that. And it doesn't matter what your handicap is or your ability. Everybody needs that other set of eyes. The other thing is that what you think you are doing and what you think you are feeling is generally not true. So like the feel is not real is the saying, right? And so it's you tell somebody, "Hey, you need to have the club a little bit more on a flatter plane," and you show them on video where they really are, and they're like, "Oh my God, I had no idea that's what the club looked like," right? So because what their sense of what they're feeling and what they're doing and what's really happening are two completely different things. And that's where that other set of eyes and having the feedback from the video and having a coach, who understands the swing is important.
Yeah, I think that's, and I personally found that too. You have no idea really what you think, and I feel like this is kind of, just the novice progression and approach to a golf season too, is like, in April, you're just kind of going out, hitting the ball, you get a couple good shots, whatever. And then you start to, maybe develop a consistency, whether a slight hook or a slight slice, and you start to play into that. And then you start to play brain games, but it might be something as simple as, you're not approaching the ball correctly, or, the club is, the club head is a little bit open in impact. And then you start to go down a bad path mentally. And then it just continues to, it's that positive feedback cycle, that nasty, just start making the same mistakes. So I think the other set of eyes, at least for me personally, has been huge. What do you recommend people do, Allan, in the off season, right? So especially in New England, right? They've got all these fancy indoor, hitting kind of machine things now. Mobility, what do you, obviously keeping up with the FOMO, what else do you recommend people do in the off season?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously if you have access to be able to practice, or if you're, able to get to a warmer climate playing, that's great. But, I think that the big thing is when the clubs, for lack of a better term, kind of go away for the winter. I think the big thing is working on mobility, and and I've had conversations with clients that, look, you get to a certain point where there's only so much that you can do for them until they make changes to what their body is doing. If somebody can't get into a position that I'm asking them to get into because they're physically not able, then we either have to figure out a workaround and accept some sort of compromise, right? Or they have to go make those changes. And I think during the winter, that if people spent time working on mobility and working on things to prep their body, their game would improve. And I've seen it firsthand countless times where I send people away to professionals like yourself to go work on their physical well-being, and they come back and maybe we only have like one or two other sessions. It's not about the instructional piece of the puzzle and taking, a whole slew of lessons. It's about having the body be able to do what we're asking them to do. And when they get to a point that they do that, they start playing the best golf of their lives. I've seen it so many times where, and golf is the excuse, right? So golf is the excuse to go get into better shape and do things. But it impacts your daily life as well. I mean, you're going to feel better throughout your daily routine. So, I mean, anything that, people can do during the winter to prepare the body to play better, I think is hands down the best thing that you can do.
It's funny, Allan. I feel like it's hard for people to take that first step sometimes because they don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. They go to the gym, they hire, maybe they pick up a fitness membership at their local gym, but they don't have a routine, or, they hire a personal trainer, but it doesn't work out. I think that if people just knew that they could call their local PT office with direct access and make an appointment and their healthcare insurance covers it, that more people would do that, because it's really not a ton of work. Like, it's a few exercises, some rotation, for the back, it's a couple rotation exercises. You can do some acupuncture, some intense soft tissue to loosen things up. And you're talking about maybe 10 sessions that could completely change mobility issues in the back of the shoulder for rotate, and things like that. But chiropractic even, I mean, what is it, maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks hitting I do spinal manipulation, but even just like those hand in hand, the joint mobility and the muscular length can really be improved in as little as like 8 weeks. I mean, if people really just to give me 2 months, that could make a drastic improvement. And even just, posture, there's a ton of studies, seemingly in Men's Health every month, there's another study on how improved posture links directly to self, your attitude about yourself and your happiness in life, right? So the people who are slouching around with their forward heads, you're not looking at life the same as somebody who's walking around tall and erect, right? And it's sort of the way you approach life. But, it's funny, Allan, because we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. I'm seeing all the golfers now when the season's starting, when I keep telling them, I said, where were you in February? And I know with COVID and everything, but I need 8 to 10 weeks to really get you where I want you to be. With the acupuncture and everything, I need 8 to 10 weeks, especially if you're in pain. But, is that kind of what you found? Like, probably about 2 months,
Well, it depends on where they're starting from, right? So, I mean, if you have a client that comes to you or a patient that goes to you that's in relatively good shape, but they have, one specific issue with, mobility, or maybe need release in one specific area, I mean, it might only be a few sessions. But somebody who's starting from, a position where they haven't really done anything to work on their mobility for several years, then, it's obviously going to take longer, right? So everybody's different. But, I had one individual who, started working with a few weeks ago and encouraged him to get a foam roller. He did, been using it. And then I saw him a couple weeks later. And within that 2-week period, because he didn't really believe me until I showed him on the video, but I showed him video that I had taken from 2 weeks prior to that. But his mid back, his thoracic spine had actually the swelling and all of the things that had kind of settled in his mid back. You get that puffiness right through the thoracic spine and through the scapula had gone away. Because he was releasing that area, increasing blood flow, right? And he looked at it and he didn't, he's like, wow, you're right. And so, but that was like, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks that he had been doing that. And we'd already seen a change, and his ability to turn and move and do the things we talked about improve. So it's the physical well-being and, and doing the things that you do in conjunction with what I do go hand in hand. And it's been, obviously, look, I tell people this, if the tour players aren't doing it, then there may not be, it's probably not a reason to do it. But the tour trailer goes to every single tour event now. That was not the case 30 or 40 years ago, but there's a reason why there's a fitness trailer at every single tour event, because all of those guys are working out. They're taking care of their bodies. because the money has gotten greater than it was 30 or 40. There's more on the line. And it's like anything else. It's like if the number one player in the world is in great physical condition and he can play 72 holes at 20 under par, well, everybody else is chasing him. And so they're not going to let anybody run away and hide. And so, it's physical fitness and golf has come a long way in the last 5 or 10 years. And it starts with the tour players. And now it's working its way down into the, to local clubs, and amateurs are doing it. And people, and I think to your point before, people don't understand what's on the other side. They won't take that first step because they don't realize what the benefits will be.
Yeah, or they think that you have to be injured in order to go see a physical therapist or a chiropractor. You don't, and insurance still covers it, but people don't realize that, if you've got mobility impairment, that's going to lead to a low back injury. So you want to take care of that because golf is bending and twisting. Anytime you bend your spine and you twist and your hips don't have adequate mobility, that is a disc herniation or a disc annular tear waiting to happen. It's going to happen. It's just an eventuality. So if you're not getting that rotation through your hips and you're not good through your core in terms of tenacity and strength, then it's just a matter of time. It's a ticking time bomb. So I think if we could, Allan, somehow get the message out to people that, the two professions, really, massage, chiro, PT, they all kind of, even acupuncture, they all work hand in hand to deliver the optimal result of, mobility and skill. Because, just going to the gym is great, but if you don't have the understanding and the fundamentals of, where you need to start, or like a doctor kind of prescribing that plan of care, then you're just waiting until you get hurt. And then you're ending up, at an orthopedic, and then you're trickling down, the healthcare funnel. And that's the biggest thing. And part of the reason why I started this podcast and brought on experts like you is because we're always treating when sick instead of preventing what we know is going to happen. I mean, it's an eventuality that a 50-year-old is going to get low back pain if they haven't stretched a day in their life and don't go to the gym and go out and play golf. They are going to get low back pain. Yeah. So just kind of taking the step, and especially if you want to improve your skills, I think that's it's just a no-brainer. But let's talk about the holistic approach to healthcare. You mentioned that on the tour, everyone's, they're bringing around the bus there with the fitness equipment. That's awesome. Talk about nutrition, sleep. I mean, there's a whole realm of healthcare, associated with golf. Talk to them about that.
So, my view of holistic coaching is not just looking at the individual as solely as a golfer, right? So looking at the person as an entire entity. And what does that mean? So it means that we're taking care of the body and the mind, because if you're not doing that, then your performance is going to suffer. And there's obviously components to that: nutrition, your physical fitness, your the mental part of the game, and the psychology component, all that stuff. And so it all goes into one basket. I mean, we are one individual being, and so that everything has an impact. And obviously, depending on the level that people are playing, I mean, those individuals that are playing on tour and playing for a living, that's their full-time job. The people at the local that are playing at our local facilities, they obviously don't have the time to put in, but that doesn't mean there aren't little things that you can do that are just a few minutes out of your day that will make a difference. And the components that we've talked about today are just that. And so, I try to get as much information up front as I can from each individual client to figure out what makes them tick, because it isn't, sure, the technique of, the things that we've talked about, like grip and posture, and those things are obviously important, but what are they thinking about, and how are they taking care of themselves, and what are they eating before a round, and what are they eating and drinking during a round, and what do you do to recover? And I think that, one of the things that I've really learned and kind of had an idea, but the now that you can quantify it, like, in doing things like wearing like a whoop, where it actually shows you what your recoveries look like, and getting enough sleep and how that impacts how you feel the next day and the level of output that you can put forth, it's important, if you're doing the right things each day, you're going to feel better on the golf course. And to your point, it's not hard, it's not time consuming, But I think the biggest thing that I try to do is make people aware. The awareness to those things that will change how you feel and how you play. It's my responsibility to make people aware of that.
Yeah, and then just maybe educating them on what the next step in the process is.
Correct.
Options are, right?
Yep.
I think that's huge. But let's talk. There's one thing that I really did want to talk about too. That's was kind of like on that list of questions we were looking at was the weight shifting, right? So talk about kind of the weight shifting. You were talking about force plates. That was really interesting to me because I didn't even really think about that in terms of the golf.
Yes.
Arena, but let's talk.
So as technology has changed, right, and we have the availability of all kinds of technology that we didn't have, 10 or 15 years ago. One of the things that has become more popular in golf coaching is the use of force plates, right? So the force plate, the one that I use called Body Track, and so it basically measures and quantifies and shows where your weight is being distributed throughout the swing and how that weight is being transferred. So we're able to see at every single sequence throughout the swing where your weight is located and where your connectivity to the ground, right? So because we talk about ground force and your ability to push off and your resistance to the ground and how that allows you to maintain balance and create speed. And so the fitness aspect of it and where we see that it impacts this is where people do have, tight psoas from sitting in the low back. Weight distribution will tend to be back in the heels, and when you're starting from a position of posture where you're back in your heels, it affects your spine angle. And if you're, and I'll let you elaborate on this because this is but if your hip is rotated back, right? So if the glute is back, it limits the ability to rotate, right? So we're asking people to rotate their torso and their hips. We want the weight to end up in their right heel when they get to the top. But if their weight is already back there, we're inhibiting that turn. And so what that does and what that translates into is two things. It can cause a reverse shift, right? A reverse pivot. It also causes an over the top swing because when people get to a point where they can't continue to turn, they tend to lift. And when they lift and go up, that club gets super vertical at the top. And if their angle of attack and their downswing is steep, then they come over the top. And so it affects the path. So I don't know if I stole this for somebody or if I actually said it, but I've been saying it for a while now. And I said, posture is a predictor of path. When I see somebody and how they're set up and what their posture looks like before the club even goes into motion, I can with pretty, 99% certainty tell you what the path of the club is going to be, both going back and going down based on how they are set up before the club even goes into motion. So posture is a predictor of path.
So I think it's, that's a really important point when you think about if you can give that objective feedback to a golfer, and they can immediately change, with the objective thing, biofeedback is really what it is, right? You're seeing yourself do what it is. If you can, that's a simple change. You just don't know that you're doing it. It's that other set of eyes phenomenon again. That's really cool. I think that's so that's a really neat technology. Obviously we've kind of been using the TrackMan for a while.
So there's several launch monitors out there that TrackMan is obviously the most popular one. Foresight makes one called the GC Quad, and there are pros and cons to both, right? So TrackMan is a radar-based one, which is really good at seeing the golf ball. The Quad, the GC Quad, the Foresight product, actually it sees the head, so it's not radar-based, it's camera-based. And so you actually will see people like DeChambeau using both. They have the TrackMan behind, they got the Quad to the right of them and in front of them, because one is really good at measuring the ball and the other one is really good at seeing what the club head is doing, and so they get both. So there's pros and cons to that, but it does, again, like Body Track, like video, and the launch monitors allow us to provide feedback to the individual so that they can hopefully relate what the result is, right? And understanding path and what that does and what they're feeling. Because to me, that's the thing that matters to me is that when the individual leaves at the end of an hour, I want them to be able to say to me that they understand what it feels like to put the club in the proper position. That's all that is 100% what I'm trying to get to. And then they have to go off and practice it, obviously. But if they don't have that understanding, there's not going to be any improvement.
Yeah, because the whole point is replicability, right? So the person being able to replicate what you're doing in that lesson and then bringing that to the next lesson.
Yep.
Correct?
Yep.
One last thing, let's talk about equipment, right? So this is always the hot topic, right? And, I love, the Google search, did my driver lose its ping, right? It's like most drivers, like how long, I guess, would you say a driver is good for? And how often do you suggest to people take classes with you to update their equipment?
Well, it depends on how much you play, right? So they talk about metal fatigue, right? And does the face of the driver fatigue? And there's studies that have been shown that the answer is yes, because really what's happened over the last few years is they're trying to make the faces thinner and thinner and thinner because that's what increases the ball speed. Now there's a limit to what they can do based on the rules, right? So you can't have it's 0.830 is the coefficient of restitution, right? So that's what they call core when you hear the words core. So the ball can't rebound off the face at more than 83% of the speed that it was delivered to the club face, right? So that's what that means, right? Coefficient of restitution. So science lesson for the day. But in order to get to that point where they've increased that speed off the face, they've made the faces thinner. So does the metal fatigue with those thin faces? Sure. And somebody who really swings the club at a high rate of speed, I've seen the faces crack, right? So, I've had driver faces cracked. Hasn't happened in a few years when I was younger. Used to happen more often than it does now. I think more than the metal fatiguing, I think the technology changes are probably the bigger benefit to changing equipment. And how often, it's really it's a personal decision as to what you want to do. I would say that the most important thing that individuals should do is to get properly fit for their equipment. I think that the biggest mistake that you can make is to drop 500 on a driver or 1,000 on a set of irons and buy it off the rack. Getting properly fit to make sure that you have the equipment that you need that will suit you is the most important thing that you can do. And if you're asking me for a rule of thumb, I would say, if you play a fair amount, 2 to 3 seasons on a driver and maybe 5 seasons on a set of irons, and wedges probably more often, especially if it's the one that you use out of the bunker, because those grooves do wear out if you're using them out of the sand, and it does affect the control and the ability to spin the ball around the green if those grooves are worn.
Yeah. I try to change my wedges every few years. Wedges are a big thing. I think you just get comfortable with your clubs, and that's when I kind of know what they're going to do. But I think that's
and grips. I will say too, like right now, like if you're playing 30 or 40 times a year, and also rubber, loses some of the moisture. They dry out, right? I mean, it's a petroleum based product, so this is the time of year you should be thinking about getting your grips changed too. Like that's something that's overlooked. If your grips are shiny and you can see where your thumb sits on the driver with the wear mark, it's probably time for some new grips. So
it's just sliding around on you. No wonder you're sliding.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to touch on before we kind of wrap up?
No, we covered a lot. So, I think, I would just say, to everybody that's listening, do things to take care of your body. I mean, and that will allow you to play better golf, play pain-free and play longer and well into your 70s, 80s, and even 90s. I just think that, if you don't take care of your back and your health, then your body's not going to take care of you. So.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And how can people get in touch with you, Allan, if they want to maybe take a lesson with you or just reach out to you? Talk to us a little about your new opportunity and how that.
Yeah. So, I founded Belden Golf at the beginning of the year. And so, the easiest way to reach me is my name, allanbelden@gmail.com. So that's the most convenient way to get me. Website's under construction. But I've also just recently accepted the position of Director of Instruction at Salem Country Club. So I'll be up there this summer. on the North Shore. Up there. We'll still be in Central Mass as well, but have an opportunity to go up there. So excited about that and looking forward to getting going up there. But teaching full time now and working with individual students on a full time basis where I can focus on that has been great. It's always been my passion, and love what I'm doing right now. So
that's great. That's great. Well, thanks for joining me today, Allan. I really appreciate it. And I think unless anybody has any questions here, just had a couple there. Let's see if we have any more. I think we covered a lot. I think we did a great job of just kind of going across the board. We talked about equipment. We talked about routines, mobility. I think we hit everything. So, if anybody has any questions, you listen to this and you have any questions, or you want a specific exercise routine, I've got a couple standard golf routines that I like to email out to people. And I'm sure you do too, Allan, for mobility. Yep. 3 or 4 exercises. I can put that together pretty simply, but people want a more substantial evaluation or assessment. I'm happy to squeeze you in and we can do evaluation here. But really the skill work is all Allan's. So that's what you gotta see the PGA Pro for that type of work. And really, it's your arena. And that's where we work together really well, is just, you text me, hey, listen, I'm seeing, thoracic tightness, I can look at a golf swing and hear, and I can figure out what's going on, but I don't know how it's affecting performance. So if you're saying that this person's really, the load bearing in that right hip is off, then I can really hammer in on that and do some work there and do some more, some soft tissue, whatever you're going to do.
It's a holistic approach, and it's a team effort. And, like I said, if the tour players weren't doing it, then there would be, the tour players are what validate, what's going on. And every single person that's playing for a living right now, they have a component of health, and they have fitness gurus, and they have people like yourself that are helping them to get their bodies ready to play. So it is 100% something that everybody should be doing in order to enjoy the game more.
Yeah, perfect. All right, Allan. Well, thanks for your time today, and this is great, and appreciate it. Good luck on your next chapter, and
thank you. Yeah. Thank you. We'll see you soon. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.